Hi, I'm Ella, and I want to share with you a dark chapter of my life that felt like it was ripped right out of a twisted drama series. To give you some context, I worked at a local orphanage part-time. People often see such jobs as low-paying and even demeaning, but little did anyone know, I had an online business that was making me a lot of money. I was perfectly content, that is, until I met Mark and his mother Karen. Yes, a real Karen in the flesh, complete with the I want to speak to the manager, Aura. When I first met Mark, he seemed like an easygoing, intelligent guy who shared my love for animals and the outdoors. He was charming and kind, but a little reserved. We started dating, and it wasn't long before he proposed. All the little annoyances seemed negligible then. Love has a way of papering over the cracks, doesn't it? That's when he introduced me to his mother, Karen. From the moment she laid eyes on me, I knew I was in for a ride. The first time I met her, we were invited for dinner at her opulent house, a place that practically screamed entitlement. Marble floors, vintage furniture, the whole 9 yards. "So Ella, Mark tells me you work at an orphanage," Karen began, scrutinizing me as if I were an artifact in a museum. "Yes, I do. I find it rewarding to help children find new families," I replied, trying to keep the conversation light. "Rewarding but not very lucrative, I presume. You know, Mark deserves a woman who can contribute significantly to the household," she said, casting a side glance at Mark. Mark looked uncomfortable but said nothing, which was becoming a recurring theme with him. "Mom, Ella's job is important. It's not all about money," he finally mumbled, but it felt forced, almost like he was obliged to say it. "Oh, I didn't mean to offend. I'm just concerned for my son's future," Karen retorted, her voice laced with condescension. I wanted to tell her about my online business then, to wipe that smug look off her face, but something inside me said it was better she didn't know. Mark squeezed my hand under the table as if to say, "Don't worry about it." But the fact that he remained mostly silent while his mother picked apart my life choices was worrying. The night ended with Karen showing me a collection of porcelain dolls she had in a glass cabinet, each one creepier than the last. "These are precious, not playthings. I hope you can understand the difference," she said, looking me dead in the eye. I felt like she was not just talking about the dolls. As we left her house, Mark turned to me and said, "She's just protective of me. You'll get used to her ways." "Should I have to?" I asked, my voice tinged with disappointment and concern. Mark sighed. "Let's just focus on our wedding. Things will get better, you'll see." But they didn't get better. They got far worse. I look back at that dinner as a moment when I should have seen all the red flags for what they were. Instead, I convinced myself that love would conquer all, a fairy tale belief that would soon prove to be my undoing. The day had finally arrived, the one every little girl dreams of. My wedding day. The weather was perfect, not a cloud in the sky, and the sun was shining in a way that made everything seem magical. I should have been elated, but a cloud of apprehension had settled over me. I chalked it up to wedding jitters and tried to focus on the joyous occasion. After all, I was about to marry the man I loved. What could go wrong, right? We had rented a beautiful outdoor venue with a large marquee and an altar surrounded by flowers. It was the kind of setting that would make anyone believe in happy endings. My bridesmaids were buzzing around me, making sure every detail was perfect, from the way my veil sat on my head to the lay of the train of my dress. As I began my walk down the aisle, I caught sight of Karen perched in the front row with an expression that was hard to decipher. She looked me up and down as I walked by and whispered just loud enough for me to hear, "You really shouldn't wear white. It's a color meant for purity." A wave of humiliation washed over me. My eyes darted toward Mark, who stood by the altar looking almost distracted, a mere spectator to what was supposed to be the most significant day of our lives. He caught my eye for a brief moment but looked away, offering neither a smile nor a reassurance. That's when it hit me. Mark wouldn't stand up for me, not even on our wedding day. The ceremony was a blur. Vows were exchanged, rings were slipped onto fingers, and before I knew it, we were pronounced husband and wife. Mark kissed me, but it was perfunctory, lacking the warmth and love I had once felt from him. As we made our way to the reception area, I thought maybe, just maybe, we could put the awkwardness behind us and enjoy our day. But as we entered, Karen took the microphone for an impromptu speech. "I just wanted to say how happy we are to welcome Ella into our family," she began, her voice dripping with feigned enthusiasm. "We know she will strive to be the wife that Mark deserves." The underlying message wasn't lost on me, nor was it on some of the guests who exchanged awkward glances. Mark took the microphone next. "Thank you, everyone, for being here. Let's all just have a good time." And with that, he put the microphone down and walked away. Feeling abandoned, I took a seat at the head table, picking at my food. My friends tried to engage me in conversation, but my heart wasn't in it. Here I was, in the middle of what should have been the happiest day of my life, feeling utterly alone. The evening came to a close, and as the guests began to leave, I found myself standing next to Mark. Both of us seemingly lost for words. Finally, I broke the silence. "Is this how it's going to be?" Mark looked at me and said, "Let's not ruin our wedding day with negative thoughts, Ella." "But it's already ruined, don't you see?" I said, my voice breaking. "Your mother insulted me, and you just stood there. You didn't defend me, not once." Mark sighed. "She's my mom, Ella. What do you expect me to do?" "I expected you to stand up for your wife," I replied, as tears filled my eyes. "That's what I expected." We left the venue, each lost in our own thoughts, a newly married couple already teetering on the edge. But the worst was yet to come. If only I had known then that the love I thought we had was already poisoned, I might have spared myself the horror that awaited me. After the fiasco that was our wedding, Mark and I moved into my house. I had bought it a few years ago from the earnings of my online business, a fact still unknown to Mark and his intrusive mother. The place was cozy and filled with memories of a simpler time. A time before Karen's constant belittling and Mark's baffling indifference. For the first few days, it felt like we were playing house. Mark would leave for work in the morning, and I'd head to the orphanage. We'd come back home, share a meal, and go to bed, avoiding conversations that veered too close to our lingering issues. Then the invasions began. It started subtly. Karen would drop by unannounced, usually while Mark was at work, under the pretext of just checking in. "So Ella, how's married life treating you?" she'd say, casually inspecting the contents of my living room as if it were a thrift store. "It's fine, thank you," I would reply, attempting to conceal my annoyance. "You know, Mark is used to a certain standard of living. I hope you're not dragging him down with you," she'd retort, her words acidic. And just like clockwork, Mark would come home and find nothing wrong with his mother's invasive visits. "She's just being a mother, Ella." What's so bad about that? What's bad is her blatant disrespect for me, Mark. It's my house too, you know, I'd snap back, finally losing my patience. Mark would shrug, offering no solution or consolation, and thus the cycle continued. The turning point came about a month into our marriage. Karen arrived at my house, her smile more strained than usual. This time she came bearing a gift, a set of teacups. "I thought these would look lovely in your home," she said, placing them on the table. They were beautiful indeed, but knowing Karen, the cups came with strings attached. I thanked her nevertheless, opting to keep the peace. Then she did something unexpected. She offered to make tea. As she fumbled around in my kitchen, I couldn't shake off the feeling that something was amiss. Karen being helpful was as rare as a solar eclipse, and I had learned to trust my instincts. She returned to the living room, carrying a tray with 2 cups of tea. "Here you go, dear. One for you and one for me." As she set the cups down and turned to fetch the milk from the kitchen, I noticed her slightly hesitating, glancing at Mark, who stood near the doorway. My suspicion turned into adrenaline. With my heart pounding, I quickly switched our cups. "We should toast to family," she said, raising her cup. "To family," I repeated, forcing a smile. As we took our first sips, I watched her closely. A couple of minutes later, her face turned red, and she began to choke. She clutched her throat, gasping for air, and collapsed onto the floor. Panic filled the room. Mark rushed to his mother's side, yelling for me to call an ambulance. But in that moment, it clicked. I understood the gravity of what I had just escaped. The room spun as the realization hit me. These people, my husband and my mother-in-law, had just tried to poison me. "Scream all you want," I said, my voice trembling but resolute. "Neither of you will live to regret this." Mark looked up at me, confusion and dread replacing his earlier indifference. For the first time, he seemed to realize that he had gravely underestimated his wife. And as I picked up Karen's handbag, discovering the small bottle of poison hidden inside, I knew I had gathered all the evidence I needed to bring their house of cards crashing down. This wasn't just a case of a meddling mother-in-law and a spineless husband anymore. It was a matter of life and death, and I was not going down without a fight. After the shocking incident with the tea, I didn't waste any time. I snapped pictures of the poison bottle with my phone, and while Mark was distracted trying to revive his gasping mother, I slipped out of the house, my heart racing as I headed straight to the police station. Upon my arrival, I spilled the whole story, presenting them the bottle as evidence. The police acted swiftly, arresting both Karen and Mark that very night. Mark was stunned, disoriented. His eyes met mine as they led him away in handcuffs, but he looked more confused than remorseful. In the days that followed, my life became a whirlwind of lawyer meetings, court appearances, and endless questions. I was mentally and emotionally drained, but there was no turning back. During the investigation, a search warrant was issued for our home. The police discovered a stash of arsenic in the garden shed, a place where Mark frequently tinkered around. It was all too overwhelming, realizing that the man I had planned to share my life with was willing to get rid of me, presumably for the financial gain he thought he'd have in my absence. Finally, the trial began. My lawyer was a stern woman with an excellent track record. She believed in my case and fought tooth and nail to bring Karen and Mark to justice. When I took the stand, I found myself locking eyes with Mark. Why? Was all I could mouth to him, hoping to find some shred of humanity, some semblance of the man I had once loved. His face was unreadable, but he broke the gaze first, looking down in what I assumed was shame, or maybe the realization that he was trapped. "Do you recognize this?" my lawyer said, holding up the bottle of poison. "Yes. I found it in Karen's purse," I answered, trying to steady my voice. "And you have reason to believe both defendants plan to poison you?" "Yes," I replied, recounting the tea incident and the suspicious behavior leading up to it. Finally, the verdict was announced. Karen was sentenced to 6 years in prison for attempted poisoning. Mark got 4 years for complicity. I felt a mixture of relief and sorrow as they were led away. Relief because justice was served, and sorrow for the love that was irrevocably lost. After the trial, I filed for divorce. Mark didn't contest it. Perhaps it was his way of admitting guilt. The lawyers did their thing, and soon enough, I was back to being just Ella, no strings attached. "Are you going to sell the house?" a friend asked me after it was all over. "No, I said firmly. That house is mine, bought from money I earned. I'm not letting anyone drive me away from my own home. So what's next for you, Ella? I looked out of the window, contemplating the future for the first time in months. It was uncertain, but it was mine to shape. I survived, I said softly, and now I want to live. Life after the trial was far from easy, but the ordeal had revealed to me my own strength, a strength I vowed never to underestimate again. The last straw had broken the camel's back, but it had also set me free. And as I sat alone in the house that was once the symbol of my marital dreams, I realized that the key to a new beginning was held within my own hands, waiting to unlock doors I had yet to even approach. The day was cloudy, casting a gloomy shadow over the house as Karen came waltzing in with her folk smile and the new set of teacups she'd brought as a gift. There was an air of tension, thick enough to cut with a knife. As she sauntered into my kitchen to make tea, my instincts screamed that something was not right. This was a woman who barely lifted a finger that didn't involve pointing it at someone else's faults. "Where's the sugar, dear?" Karen called from the kitchen. "Top shelf, next to the coffee maker," I responded, my voice tinged with suspicion. When she finally returned to the living room, the tray in her hands carried 2 cups filled with steaming hot tea. She handed one to me and took one for herself, setting the tray on the coffee table. "A toast," she proclaimed, raising her cup to family and the bonds that hold us together. "To family," I echoed. My eyes locked onto hers as I took a small sip. It tasted normal, but a nagging feeling told me otherwise. My eyes darted to Mark, who was standing awkwardly near the kitchen doorway, observing the whole scene unfold. The silent communication, or perhaps collusion between mother and son, did not escape me. A few sips in, I noticed her face change color. Her eyes widened as she clutched her throat, gasping for air. It took only moments for her to collapse onto the floor. Chaos erupted. Mark screamed, "Mom, what's happening?" Ignoring him, I jumped up and ran to the table, snatching Karen's purse and rummaging through it. My fingers closed around a small bottle, almost hidden beneath her makeup kit and wallet. "I knew it," I muttered, my heart pounding in my chest. Mark looked at me, finally grasping the magnitude of what had just happened. "Finding evidence," I snapped. "Your mother just tried to poison me, and you were part of it." His eyes widened. "That's absurd." "Is it?" I retorted, holding up the bottle for him to see. "This was in her purse, Mark. She choked on her own vile plan." Mark's face paled, realizing the depth of the hole he had dug for himself. "You both underestimated me," I said, looking down at Karen, who was now being attended to by paramedics. They had arrived quickly after a frantic 911 call by Mark. And now you're going to pay for it. I grabbed my phone, snapped photos of the bottle, and forwarded them to my email as a backup. Then I picked up my car keys, took one last look at the life I was leaving behind, and headed straight for the police station. As I drove, my hands trembled on the steering wheel, and a wave of emotions washed over me. Anger, betrayal, but mostly relief. I had dodged a bullet, quite literally. That cup of tea could have been the end of me. It was my wake-up call, a glaring sign that screamed it was high time to cut the dead weight from my life. I had survived their twisted game, and I had every intention of making sure they faced the consequences of their actions. My next stop was the police station, and after that, the court of law. The tea incident was not just an end. It was a new beginning, an opportunity to reclaim the life that was almost stolen from me. The courtroom was abuzz with murmurs as I took my seat. Across the aisle, I could see Karen and Mark, both looking significantly worse for wear. Their eyes were heavy, weighed down by the gravity of what they'd done and the subsequent weeks in custody. The trial had attracted considerable attention. After all, a tale of a mother and son trying to poison the new wife was the kind of drama that could easily grab headlines. Reporters filled the gallery, their pens poised and cameras ready. The judge entered, and everyone rose. "Be seated," he commanded, and the trial was underway. The prosecutor began laying out the case against Karen and Mark, their eyes often meeting mine as they described the nefarious plan that had been thwarted. The bottle of poison was presented, along with the transcripts of my initial statement to the police and subsequent testimonies. Then it was my turn to take the stand. "Do you swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?" the bailiff asked. "I do," I replied, locking eyes with the prosecutor as I took my seat. "Ella, could you please recount the events that led you to believe your life was in danger?" she began. I went through the story, detailing each moment that had led up to the tea incident. When I finished, the prosecutor turned to the jury. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is not just a case of a fractured family, but one of a premeditated, malicious attempt to end a licious attempt to end a life. I urge you to consider the evidence presented and deliver justice." The defense lawyers for Karen and Mark did their best to muddy the waters, suggesting that I had misunderstood the situation. Yet when faced with the undeniable evidence, the bottle of poison, the traces of arsenic found in the tea, after what seemed like an eternity, the jury returned. The foreperson cleared her throat. In the case against Karen, we find the defendant guilty of attempted murder. In the case against Mark, we find the defendant guilty of complicity in attempted murder. A collective gasp filled the courtroom. Karen's face twisted into a mask of disbelief, while Mark lowered his head, defeated. The judge donned his reading glasses. "Karen, for the charge of attempted murder, you are hereby sentenced to 6 years in federal prison. Mark, for your complicity in this heinous act, you are sentenced to 4 years in federal prison." I felt a shudder of relief wash over me. Justice had been served. As they led Karen and Mark away, I caught my ex-husband's eye one last time. There was no emotion left to exchange, no words that could mend the shattered reality of what our life had become. "Ella," my lawyer said as we left the courtroom, "it's over. You're free now. What will you do?" "I don't know," I replied. "But whatever it is, it'll be on my terms." And that's exactly what I did. I devoted myself to my work at the Orphanage, expanded my online business, and even started a support group for victims of familial abuse. As I moved forward, the chains of my past loosened, falling away to reveal a future that was mine and mine alone to shape. I won't say that healing was easy. It wasn't. But with time, the scars began to fade, becoming mere reminders of a past chapter. A story I would carry, but that would no longer define me. Justice wasn't just about courtroom verdicts. It was about reclaiming my life, rediscovering my worth, and setting the stage for new beginnings. And so, as I stepped into the dawn of this new life, it was with a sense of purpose and self-assuredness I had never felt before. I was a survivor, a warrior, a woman reborn. I had faced the abyss, teetered on its edge, and emerged stronger than ever. In the end, justice wasn't merely served, it was earned, every grueling step of the way.